Join my army of the dead.
Hello and welcome to a brand new build guide video. In this video, I will be sharing with you my Poison Blade Shadow Step Rogue that I believe is going to be the #1 build for the Rogue, if not the #1 build in Diablo 4. So let's get into it. Starting with the skill tree, we go with Fundamental Puncture. Hitting an enemy with at least 2 blades at once makes them vulnerable for 2 seconds. This helps with making enemies vulnerable on command. Then we come down and get 5 points into Twisting Blades, and we get Improved Twisting Blades. Enemies are dazed while impaled with Twisting Blades. We then come down and take 3 points into Sturdy, as well as come down and take Shadow Step, and we take Methodical Shadow Step. Enemies damaged by Shadow Step are stunned for 2 seconds. We then take Weapon Mastery, as well as 1 point into Concussive and Trick Attacks. I put 1 point into Mending Obscurity because we do have a stealth ability on this build, as well as put 3 points into Agile for the dodge stance because we're also using plenty of cooldowns. Onto Concealment now. We put 1 point in there, and then we take Subverting Stealth. The skill that breaks concealment always makes enemies vulnerable for 6 seconds. This is very handy for keeping us alive. Poison Trap now. We take Subverting Poison Trap. We have a lot of stuns in this build, so it allows us to stun lock the enemies in the Poison Trap, allowing us to take advantage of the 10% bonus increased poison damage. Our next passives now are Exploit and Malice. I have 3 points from my Amulet into Exploit. I think it's really good passive to have. We take Precision Imbuement. Imbue skills gain 90% increased crit chance. We're using Poison Imbuement. I like blended Poison Imbuement. If you don't have a lot of crit in your build, then go with the mixed Poison Imbuement. It's just as good. Deadly Venom and Debilitating Toxins are the 2 passives we're going to go with. I do not like this passive at all when you just take Haste and get the same attack speed bonus. We also take 1 point to Adrenaline Rush to get Haste. This is just a good 1 point wonder for energy regeneration. Then our key passive now, we take Victimize. Dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy has up to 35% chance to cause an explosion, dealing 23% of the original damage to them and surrounding enemies. This, and combined with our Helmet Aspect, allows us to stay alive in big groups of enemies. Before we get into the gear, I just want to let you know there will be a D4 build guide planner in the description, so if you want to find out what affixes I think are best in the slot, go to that, and you can use that to help you find your gear. Onto our helmet now. We use the Aspect. Explosions from Victimize key passive heal you for 152 life for each enemy damage up to maximum of 450 life. We make enemies vulnerable all the time, constantly getting the key passive to proc, and we're always in the group of enemies, so this allows us to stay alive, and our health bar just doesn't drop when we have vulnerable enemies around us. Onto our chest piece now. You gain 0.25% increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 15%. Obviously, this is just the lowest roll you could possibly get. I still think it's one of the best in-slot aspects for just flat armor and defense. Our gloves now, we're using basic skills, gain 30% increased attack speed. We're using basics a lot in this build, so this is just a no-brainer. Our pants now, basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for 2 seconds. Even with the lowest roll of 2 seconds, we still have this procced all the time because we're always throwing basic attacks. Our boots now. Shadow Step has an additional charge. Killing an enemy with Shadow Step refunds the charge and increases the damage of Shadow Step. We're using this because we want the additional charge, not so much for the damage, but the added damage is nice. Our two-handed weapon now, we're using the Twisting Blades Aspect. Twisting Blades over for a short time after they return to you, dealing 30% of the Twisting Blades return damage per hit. Based on the distance of the blade return, the orbit damage is increased by up to 60%. This is just really nice to allow us to get more burst on top of adding a poison imbue. You'll see we just drop the health numbers, and then the poison really just cleans up. Our next weapon now, attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill up to 30%. Again, always throwing basics, always going to have this procced. This is probably the most important aspect for the build, just for quality of life. Critical strikes with poison imbue skills have up to 10% chance to create a toxic pool. While standing in the pool, your poison imbue skills has no cooldown or charge limit. This allows us to hang in there because we have so much lifesteal. We just stand in there and constantly are proccing this and poisoning the enemy. Our first ring now, when you evade or shadow step, you leave behind a cluster of exploding stun grenades that deal 484 total damage and stun enemies for half a second. Between our evade and our shadow step, we have over 5 stuns just from this aspect alone. It helps immensely in PvP. Next ring now, your imbuement skills have 30% increased potency against vulnerable enemies. We're constantly making enemies vulnerable and constantly applying our imbuement skills to them. This is always going to be proc. Onto our amulet now. Every third cast of puncture is poison imbued with 210% of normal potency. Like I said, we're always casting our basic attack, so this will always be proc, and it's almost 400% poison damage. Our first malignant heart we use every 5 seconds while above 60% life. Core skills cost 253 life instead of your primary resource. Skills that consume life deal 19% damage. We have lifesteal in this build, so this allows us to use this without really any repercussion, and we can take advantage of that 19% bonus damage. Our next heart now, you gain 79% crit strike damage, but your non-crit strikes deal 39% less damage. I think this is great for our build because we have so many crits in our build, as well as the poison damage, so your non-crit strikes really are not that bad. Onto our Wrathful Heart now. Your damage over time effects are increased by 34% for each different crowd control effect on the target. That's really what we want because we have so many stuns with this build. Allows us to have so many crowd control effects on the target, taking advantage of that 34%. Onto our specialization now. We're using combo points. A lot of our build goes in 3s, so combo points just make sense. Onto Paragon now. We come up the right side and take our 20% damage node plus our 4% maximum life. Very good node here. Then we unlock our glyph socket. I'm using Tracker for 33% longer poisoning effects. And then I took the Lawless as well as the Skillful node here because the added armor is just a very nice plus. Moving on to our first board now, we take Exploit Weakness. But first we take the Unassailable as well as the Exploit Rare nodes before moving on to our Legendary node now. Came up the right side, got our Hunter Killer Rare node before coming over and getting our next Glyph Socket, in which I use Combat for the crit strikes restore 12% of their energy costs. I don't believe this node is worth it here, so I came up, just got our Artifice node here for the 20% vulnerable damage before moving on to our next board. Moving on to our next board now, we take Tricks of the Trade, but before that we come up and take our next Lawless node for the added armor before moving on to our next Glyph Socket, where we put Efficacy. Imbuement skills have 20% increased potency. Then we take our Focused Rare node here for the 20% damage to elites. Then we moved on and grabbed our Tricks of the Trade Legendary node here before getting our Brawler node here. As you can see, I'm only level 76, so there's still some ways to go, but this build really dominates the end game. Nightmare dungeons, uber bosses, you name it, it can kill it, and it works really, really well in PvP. So there you have it. If you enjoyed this video, give me a like and think about subscribing. I post Diablo content every 2 to 3 days. And if you want to see this build be used live, come over to twitch.tv/HuffDog94 and come hang out, and I'll see you on the next video.